I'm DD, and I'm here to tell you a story of the Beltain. Beltain night is a night for magic and fairies. And it's a time when people like to light fires as well. They have two what they call bale fires, one this side and one this side. And then in the middle, they walk through their cattle. That's their cows and their sheep and their pigs, because they think it will bless them for the new year. Many thought it was because it got rid of the bugs on them as well. But it's definitely a night for magic. It's a night when the wall between this world and the world of the fairy folk is just that little bit thinner. It's sort of more elastic, so you can move through it and you can dance with the fairies and eat and feast with them. Now the problem with that is that there are some rules you need to follow, because fairies are tricksy folk. So the first rule is that if the fairies invite you to dance and eat with them, you should not say no to the dancing bit. That's fine, because it will really upset the fairies if you don't dance with them, and nobody wants a grumpy fairy. But if you eat with them, that's the second rule. You shouldn't eat their food. Their food is magical. And if you eat their food, then 1 minute in their world is like 10 years in ours. You don't realise time is passing, and you come back here and you discover that everyone has grown older. The other thing that you really shouldn't do is tell a fairy's secrets. Oh no, fairies don't like it if you tell their secrets. And this story is the story of a man called Shenkin. He was a fiddle player in Wales, and Shenkin, well, he fell foul of the fairies. So let us begin this story of Shenkin's fairy gold. Come gather round the fire and listen to a tale. Grab yourself a piece of bread and maybe some ale as well. Come listen to a story of fairies in all their glory. And if you listen to it well, you'll soon have your own tale to tell. The sun has journeyed underground, the time for rest has come. So gather round the fire and listen, everyone. A long time ago, there lived a man called Shenkin. He was a fiddle player. That means he played the violin in inns and pubs and hostelries, anywhere where there were people who were sat maybe eating and having a drink, and he would play the violin for them. And just every now and then, they'd give him a penny for his trouble. Now this meant that Shenkin never really had a lot of money, but Shenkin was happy. He had a roof over his head and he was able to buy a small amount of bread and some small ale that he could take home for his wife for the table, and sometimes a bit of cheese. Like I say, Shenkin was happy, but his wife wasn't. His wife felt that they should be able to have some meat for the table, maybe some sausages or pork cut. Shenkin, can you just bring back just some nicer food, just maybe a bit of meat and a bit of wine, because I'm just bored with bread and cheese and ale. And Shenkin said, well, I try my best, wife, what else am I to do? And she said, Shenkin, you have to play faster, play better. Play harder, Shenkin, work harder. So Shenkin tried. And one night, Shenkin had been out in the local pub for a very long time playing, and he'd managed to get an extra couple of pennies, just enough that he might just be able to get a small flagon of wine on the way home. And as he was walking home, it was late, like I said, so the sun was setting and it was spilling out all the colours into the world and then up into the sky to be eaten by the moon. It was a bright, moonlit night that night, and Shenkin was walking back through what is known as the Fairy Hills. He could see in the distance a golden castle, and he could hear singing and dancing. This must be the fairy folk, he thought. Shenkin knew that fairy folk were tricksy, and he knew of those rules that I told you about, so he thought, I think I'll just walk around. He started to try and head towards the little copse of woodland instead of through the fairy hills. But it was too late. The fairies had seen him and knew that he was a fiddle player, and they called to him, Shenkin, Shenkin, come play for us. Come and play your fiddle and dance with us. Spend Beltane night with the fairies. Well, what was Shenkin to do? He couldn't refuse, could he? Remember, I'd said that it would upset the fairies. And so he thought, if I don't eat their food and if I play really well, maybe they'll just let me go on my way in a bit. Yeah? So, Shenkin walked across to the fairy palace. And as he walked closer, the fairy palace grew bigger in front of him until he could walk inside. And there were many, many tiny fairy folk, all singing and dancing, and there was the fairy queen beckoning him in and saying, come, sing, dance with us, Shenkin. And there were tables laden with more food than Shenkin had ever seen in his life. Chicken and pork and beef, and there were sweet potatoes. He'd never seen a sweet potato ever. Sweet potatoes and carrots and turnips and bread, cabbage and broccoli. Oh, and oranges. Shenkin had never seen oranges. But there they all were, for him to eat, should he want to. Well, Shenkin began to play his fiddle. He played fast, he played well, he played fairy music. And the fairies, they danced. And soon they invited him to eat. Come eat with us, drink our wine, Shenkin. But Shenkin knew he could not do this. And so he closed his eyes and he played his fiddle until he was so tired he had to sleep on one of the plush velvet fairy cushions that lined the hall. He fell asleep as the fairies continued to dance. In the morning, Shenkin awoke to the sound of birdsong and the hot sun rising on the horizon. He could feel the wet dew on his face, and as he woke up, he realised he was still clutching his fiddle. Thank goodness he still had that. And he could hear in the distance the bells from the village ringing to say that they now had to wake up and start the day. He looked around, but there were no fairies, no castle, no fairy food. And he seemed to be the same age as he had been when he went into the fairy castle. And as he looked around, he found a little bag of coins. He looked in. They were gold coins. It was fairy gold. Shenkin could not believe his luck. The fairies had rewarded him well for his playing. And so he thought, I can stop at the market on the way home and I can pick up that wine that the wife so wanted, and I can pick up those sausages and the bread, and oh, we can have a feast when I get home. Perhaps I'll even see if I can find some of those oranges that the fairies had. And so he did. He headed off to the market and he used one of his precious gold coins to buy a most magnificent feast for them that morning. And when he returned home, his wife had indeed been worried about where he had been all night. However, she did not care when she saw all the food that he brought with him and the wine. And Shenkin was very pleased that his wife was the same age that she was when he left. And so they sat down to a delicious breakfast of bread and sausages, wine and small ale, and they did find some of those oranges as well. Shortly after she'd finished her meal and her tummy was feeling a bit happier, his wife asked Shenkin where he had got the gold from. Oh, wife, it's a secret. I cannot tell you, I'm sorry. There should be no secrets between husband and wife, said Shenkin's wife. No, wife, really, I cannot tell you. Because, of course, Shenkin could not tell her, because it was fairy gold, and that made it a fairy secret, didn't it? So instead, Shenkin took the bag of money and he put it up in his rafters. He hid it away so that nobody else could find it. And over the coming weeks and months, he would take a little bit out every time they'd need it, and he would go to the market and buy a little bit of extra food. Now, Shenkin didn't need to play his fiddle quite as much, but he did love playing his fiddle, and so he did still play. But he didn't have to stay as late in the hostelries and the pubs and the inns, which was a good thing for Shenkin. But as the time wore on, the weeks wore on, the months wore on, the wife, she got curious again and she started to ask, Shenkin, where is this money coming from? I must know. No, wife, don't ask. Ask no questions and I will not lie to you. But as I said, Shenkin, there should not be secrets between a wife and her husband. No, wife, but just let me have this one. It's important, I promise you. But Shenkin, I'm concerned that you've turned to a life of crime to get this money. Wife, don't be so silly, said Shenkin, laughing. Don't be so silly, I have not, I promise you. So the wife let it go. But when the months turned to years, the wife got curious again. She asked again, Shenkin, where did that gold come from? I'm worried. What if it runs out? It won't. It won't, wife. But where are you getting it from? Your fiddle playing can't have suddenly got that much better. Oh, well, thank you for your confidence, said Shenkin. Oh, you cannot ask me that question again, wife. I cannot tell you. But the wife did keep asking the question. Shenkin, where did you get the gold? Why do we have all this gold? What happens when it runs out? Have you been stealing it from people? Oh, the fairies gave it to me, shouted Shenkin. Now you've done it, said his wife, because his wife knew that you shouldn't tell fairy secrets. But it was, after all, his wife's fault, was it not? Well, Shenkin was heavy-hearted when he next went to the rafters in his cottage to see if they did still have any gold left. And when he lifted down the bag, the contents of the bag it didn't rattle the same way. It didn't tinkle. It thudded. He wondered what it was, and he looked inside, and he saw there was cockle shell after cockle shell, and there was no gold in that bag anymore. And so Shenkin had to go back to playing in the hostelries and the inns and the pubs until the wee hours of the morning. He worked very hard for very little once more. But they still had a roof over their head, and they still had food. And Shenkin, he would continue to walk through the fairy fields on his way home, in the hope that maybe that castle would appear again and those fairies would call to him and ask him to play once more. But you see, the problem is, like wives, fairies have very, very, very long memories. I hope you enjoyed that story. My name's DD. I'm a professional storyteller, and you can find me on my website, which I'll put along the bottom here, and you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. If you feel you can support my work via Patreon, and I have a storytelling subscription there where you can receive stories each month, either stories for adults or stories for children. I hope to see you there. Take care and have a gloriously magical Beltain. Toodle pip.